The 1964 Tokyo Olympics had a charming and unlikely underdog story. This week, I tell the story of the Tokyo Games in 1964 and how a Native American athlete shocked the world in the men's 10,000 meters event. Welcome to the Luke Alfred Show. I have 30 years of experience on the front lines of sports journalism, covering some of the biggest games in cricket, rugby, the FIFA World Cup, and even the Olympic Games. Come and join me as we learn about some of the greatest sports stories you've never heard. I'm Luke Alfred, and welcome to the show. Nothing less than athletic glory was expected of Ron Clarke, an Australian long and middle distance athlete of the 1950s and 1960s. At 19, Clarke was already a figure of renown, so much so that he was asked to light the Olympic flame at the 1956 Games in his native Melbourne. It was compensation, Clarke said later, for not participating as an athlete in the Games themselves, but not very much more. Neither was Clarke present at the Rome Olympics in 1960, but come the Tokyo Olympics 4 years later, Clarke was there as the world record holder in the men's 10,000 meters. He was an athlete with a name, the athlete with a pedigree, and the one to beat. With his jet black hair, strong thighs, and upright running stance, he cut a fine figure. All eyes were on Clarke. Clarke also had a theory. Athletes, particularly middle and long-distance athletes, are as partial to a good theory as the next man. In the 10,000-meter finals at the Tokyo Olympics, Clarke surged through every alternate lap of the 25 laps of the cinder track course faster than the preceding lap. As a technique, it was astonishingly audacious, expressive of Clarke's supreme gifts. Surely Clarke and his theory would beat all comers. Along with Clarke, there were 5 to watch in the 10,000-meter final in Tokyo in 1964. The local favourite, Kokichi Tsuburaya, New Zealand's Barry McGee, Ethiopia's Mamo Wolde, Tunisia's Mohamed Gamoudi, and the American Jerry Lindgren. Lindgren had a theory of his own. He was famous for his insanely punishing training routine, a routine that helped him win the 10,000 meters at the US Olympic trials before the Tokyo Games. Behind him in second place in the trials was an American athlete called Billy Mills. Mills had no Clarke-like pretensions. He was an orphan whose dead father was an Oglala Sioux from the Pine Ridge Reservation of South Dakota and whose dead mother, Grace, was a Catholic. Mills also came armed. He came armed with a story. His was a story of life without parents, a story of hardship and pain. As a result of the death of his parents, he was lonely, almost an outcast, hyperglycemic, and a borderline diabetic. Life growing up without his parents in the care of his brothers and sisters wasn't easy, as this quote from the Washington Post demonstrates.
I didn't know right away that I would be a good runner. I didn't make the track team my freshman year in high school. But when I ran, I felt spiritual. Running got me through hardships. Running got me through loneliness. My mom died, and I recalled the book my dad had read with me. It was not a published book, it was a collection of articles. And I wanted to become an Olympian. One of the articles said, Olympians are chosen by the gods. If I could become an Olympian, just maybe I could be chosen by the gods, and I'd be able to see my mother again. I was probably 11 or 12 when my dad read that to me. And he died right before I turned 13.
Despite making the US Olympic team for Tokyo, Mills wasn't an athlete to watch in the 10,000 meters Olympic final. He had some experience as a cross-country athlete, but his opportunities on the track were limited. These were amateur days, and Mills was a young man of by no means considerable means. He had run outside of the United States only a few times, and his international exposure was nothing to write home about. Once he ran at a meeting in Belgium. There he encountered the Tunisian Gamoudi, who advised Mills to work on his speed. Speed was a thing for Mills. He believed he needed more of it. Speed would bring him up to speed. Speed was a bone of contention with Bill Easton, one of Mills's coaches at the University of Kansas, where he went after school. Mills wanted to do more speed work. Easton demurred, saying in the words of the day that Negroes were sprinters and that they were speed merchants. They had the speed market cornered. Quote, "You, Billy, are an Indian, and Indians run forever." If life at high school was challenging, life at the University of Kansas was plain hard. Never quite able to fit in, never able to join a fraternity, Mills only had his running to fall back upon. Here he was free, but there were times when running was only a poor compensation for a life Mills felt he never had. After university, he joined the Marines, one of the few avenues available to men of his class. He didn't know exactly what opportunities the Marines might provide, but maybe something would come along. He was wise and talented enough to keep on running. By the time that he got to the Tokyo Olympics, Mills' status as not one to watch was a given, so widely and fundamentally accepted that this is what one of the commentators, there will be more of this subplot later on, had to say about him in the early stages of a final in which he was not amongst the favourites. Listen carefully because the snatch of commentary is over quickly.
Billy Mills of the United States is in there, a man no one expects to win this particular event.
They were, as the saying goes, famous last words. Mills wasn't deterred by what he must have suspected others thought of him. In the final, he continued running his laps and listening to the voices in his head, keeping up with the leaders. With just over half the race complete and twilight seeping in, the floodlights came on. By now the race was elongated, like an accordion that has air sucked into its lungs. Front runners began to lap back markers. All eyes were still on Clark, the world record holder in the distance. They had reason to be. Clark was the man. The gold medal seemed like an inevitability. Or did it? It had been a long, long race to get the Games to Tokyo, an administrative marathon of lobbying and logistics and event planning. The planning took so long that it took 24 years. Originally, Tokyo was meant to host the 1940 Olympics, but concerns over the Sino-Japanese War meant that it was politically unacceptable to the West for Japan to continue as a host. The 1940 Games were awarded to Helsinki instead. No Olympics were held in 1940, however, because of the Second World War, and neither was the Games held in 1944. While it might have been logical for the first post-war Games to go to Helsinki, this didn't happen. The 1948 Games, in fact, went to London. The vanquished Axis powers, Germany and Japan, were not invited to the 1948 Olympic Games. Finally, the 1952 Games went to Helsinki, with Germany and Japan being invited for the first time in the post-World War II period. Japan won 1 gold, 6 silvers and 2 bronze medals in Helsinki to finish 17th on the medals table with a haul of 9 medals, while Germany finished 28th overall with 17 silver medals and 7 bronze medals, 1 spot behind Luxembourg. Forgive me while I interrupt the sports story to tell you about the Luke Alfred Show Patreon. As you may know, being a writer is not the most lucrative career choice. Please consider making a small donation to keep the show going at patreon.com/The Luke Alfred Show. But for now, let's get back to the story. It is difficult to escape the conclusion that the 1964 Games were finally awarded to Japan as a gesture of international goodwill, a kind of things must return to normal decency. The Japanese understood their hosting of the Games as an attempt to show the rest of the world that her rehabilitation was complete. They were as keen on rebuilding images as well as highways, perceptions as well as skyscrapers. Here was a society at peace, one no longer at war. As the floodlights began to illuminate the runners in the 10,000 meters, Clark, Gammoudi, Wold, McGee, and Mills. Lindgren, the winner of the U.S. trials, was nowhere in sight. It is traditional for films to be made of an Olympics. The organizers want a permanent record of their achievements, and the government, who have invariably stumped up the cash, want their pound of flesh too. The Japanese film of the Tokyo Olympics was originally directed by Akira Kurosawa, famous for his film The Seven Samurai. So developed was Kurosawa's talent for being a martinet that soon he and the organizers differed in their opinions about how the film should proceed. Kurosawa was relieved of his role, and another esteemed Japanese film director, Kon Ichikawa, replaced him. Ichikawa's film is freely available on the internet. Like everything else, it comes with a story. The story is this. When Ichikawa looked at the Olympics, he saw timeless images of the human body running and jumping, bending and sweating, fretting and pulsing. He saw the vaguely martial air of the march past, in which the thoughtful Cubans waved little Japanese flags at their hosts and thousands of Japanese spectators. With what I like to think of as mild humor, Ichikawa showed that the teams from the USA and the USSR, both of them massive, walked back to back in the march past itself because, of course, the march past takes place in descending alphabetical order. He showed the team from Cameroon at her first Games appearance, and that from the Congo had 2 participants each. The film's narrator helpfully pointed out that, for the first time in Olympic history, the teams of East and West Germany were combined. It was to be an Olympics of healing. For 2 weeks, the message seemed to be the past was to be left behind. It was also to become an Olympics of becoming. In the march past was a country called Northern Rhodesia, who, by the time the Olympics were over, no longer existed. Northern Rhodesia was by that stage called what we now all know as Zambia. What else did Ichikawa show in his film? He showed the long journey of the Olympic torch across Turkey, through Beirut. It visited Tehran and Lahore, New Delhi, Rangoon, Hong Kong, and Okinawa. A month after the flame had left Greece, it arrived in Hiroshima to tumultuous applause. Slightly tubby policemen struggled to keep the crowds back in Hiroshima. Children looked perplexed, excited, and then cried. Grannies waved their flags. Others cheered. In the back streets, behind the route run by the torchbearer, was bombed out and crater-full Hiroshima. He showed the lighting of the Olympic flame without having to tell Japanese viewers of the film that the flame was lit by a 19-year-old Roshinori Sakai, who was born on the very day that the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. Although the opening sequence of the film shows a heavy ball languidly swinging at a wobbly wall so as to collapse it further, the organizers also had issues with Ichikawa. Why did he not show Japan's commitment to post-war reconstruction? Why was he not more boosterish? Why did he not show fabulous sequences of the bullet train, whose maiden journey took place only 9 days before the start of the Tokyo Games? Why, perhaps more pointedly, did Ichikawa show things that they were desperately trying to forget? At the bell to signal the last lap of the men's 10,000-meter final in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, the field had been reduced to 3: Mills, Clark, and Gammoudi, in that order. The slightly exotic, obscure American off the Pine Ridge Reservation, the Aussie world record holder, and the neat, naturally gifted Tunisian in his red vest and white shorts.
Billy Mills in the lead, Ron Clark of Australia in second place, Gammoudi of Tunisia in third. It's Billy Mills and Ron Clark. Billy Mills and Ron Clark. Both runners running very hard, lapping the other runners right now. Ron Clark of Australia has moved in, and there goes Gammoudi of Tunisia. He's just elbowed his way through the pack. Gammoudi of Tunisia has the lead.
They were all of an age, all running the race of their lives. Clark was the oldest of them all, being born in 1937. Gammoudi, the Tunisian, was born almost exactly a year later in 1938, and Mills, the youngest of the three by 4 months, was born in June 1938. Here were 3 young men, one from Africa, one from America, one from Australia, faster over this distance than anyone else in the world, battling to see who would crest through the tape first. It was anyone's race. Down the back straight, and Clark elbowed Mills out of the way to take a slight lead. Seen from one angle, it looks relatively harmless. From another, it shows Mills almost being put off his stride and forced to the outside. Gammoudi, seeing his opportunity, managed to wriggle between the two athletes marginally in front of him, and he surged into the lead, his head wobbling on his shoulders slightly in that distinctive way of his. Let's leave the race for a moment and return to the official filmmaker, Ichikawa. The powers that be were not happy with Ichikawa's depiction of post-war Japan. At the same time, they could not afford to have a repeat of the Kurosawa incident. Ichikawa, after all, was a milder man. They would seek a compromise, allowing Ichikawa his vision while creating two versions of the film, a long one and a short one, like two different events in the Olympics themselves. There is a stone of stubbornness lurking inside the heart of every artist, and Ichikawa was not without his hardness of heart. He allowed for two versions of the film to circulate, and it did extremely well at the box office, particularly in Japan. But a vision, finally, is a vision, and officialdom was not going to tell him how to make a movie, a subject about which, unlike them, he knew much. Of what did his vision consist? Ichikawa had a gentle eye, but it was also a trained and trenchant eye, an eye that noticed things. He noticed how, for example, a shot putter from the USSR fiddled with the number safety pinned to his vest in a manner suggestive of bother and perplexity. He noticed how an American shot putter tucked the putt into his shoulder and collarbone, twisting his neck round to do so. He noticed a Hungarian's shoes. In the Ichikawa film, we see the nervous anxiety of an American sprinter hammering in his starting blocks in the agonizing minutes before he races in, and wins, the men's 100 meters final. But back to the final 200 meters of the men's 10,000 meter final. Gammoudi, having elbowed deftly between Mills and Clark, was in a 6-meter lead over Clark and an 8 or 9 meter lead over Mills. The three plunged for home, a glut of slow-moving athletes between them and the finish line. As the three approached the back markers, Clark made his move, reaching the inexplicably slowing Tunisian. Sensing the Australian's presence, the Tunisian had already looked over his shoulder at least once. Gammoudi managed to find energy from some corner of his being. He matched Clark in a kind of fast-moving, do-or-die standoff, as neither managed to sneak ahead. So preoccupied were they with each other that neither of them seemed to notice Mills. They should have, for Mills had never left them, not really. The Tunisian, remember, had told Mills at a meet in Belgium that he should concentrate on his speed. Shortly before the Olympics, this is exactly what Mills did. He ran a series of 200-meter sprints that left others shaking their heads. Everyone else had a theory. Why shouldn't he have a theory too? As they spent the final ounces of their energy keeping up with each other, so Mills had passed them. He didn't take the easy route. He never had. He went outside the clutch of back markers to beat both the Tunisian and the Australian into second and third place. Despite Clark's stellar career, in which he broke records like others break eggs, 1965 being his record-breaking year, the bronze medal in the men's 10,000 meters in Tokyo was the only Olympic medal Clark ever won. For Gammoudi, it was just the beginning. He won gold in the 5,000 meters at the 1968 Olympics and bronze in the 10,000 meters. At Munich, 4 years later, he won silver in the 5,000 meters, meaning 4 Olympic medals, 1 gold, 2 silvers, and 1 bronze, spread over 3 consecutive Olympic Games in all. So disoriented was Mills by his win that he asked one of the course officials if he still had a lap to go. He was reassured that he didn't. When the little matter of an extra lap was solved, the official asked Mills who he was. Where was he from? He was so exhausted he could barely muster a smile. I mentioned earlier that because of his unlikely 10,000-meter victory, TV commentator Dick Bank lost his job. This was not the commentator we heard earlier, blithely referring to Mills as an athlete who no one expected to win the event, but someone who was so captivated by the late Mills surge that he lost his shit. Let's hear him do it.
Here they come down the final out. Can Ron Clark catch the Moody? They're going through the field. He's coming up. He's passing the Moody. Look at Mills! Look at Mills! Look at Mills! Coming on! Mills is coming on! It might be Bill Mills. What a tremendous surprise here! Bill Mills of the United States wins the 10,000 meters. Bill Mills of the United States, a tremendous upset, wins the 10,000 meter.
Not only did Bank lose his shit, he lost his job. The conventions of TV commentary in the 1960s required a certain propriety. It was considered inappropriate to get too emotional. Others could, you couldn't. Bank showed the emotion everyone watching was feeling. For this, he lost his job. There is an amusing coda to the Mills story. The last athlete home in the 10,000 meters on the day was a Ceylonese athlete. Ceylon had not yet become Sri Lanka, called Ranatunga Karunananda. The crowd was initially lukewarm to Karunananda, an engineer in the Ceylonese army. But when there was no one left on the track and so no one left to cheer, Karunananda miraculously started to speed up, and they started to cheer. For a moment, he became an unlikely hero in Japan. That moment has lasted a surprisingly long time. The engineer has even found his way into Japanese school textbooks, where he is referred to as the, quote, bottom-ranked hero, wearing uniform number 67. I cannot vouch for this completely, having no great knowledge of Japanese school textbooks and their contents, but I guess the bottom-ranked hero has an entry larger than Mills's. If you enjoyed this episode of The Luke Alfred Show, please give me a 5-star rating. As an independent creator, this podcast is made possible through your support.